You're listening to CKUT 90.3 FM on the dial, www.ckut.ca on the internet. Our next interview will be with Farid Khan, who's a tireless advocate for the Rohingya people. Please stay with us. A letter dated June 25, 2015, addressed to Foreign Affairs Minister Chrystia Freeland reads, "We, the undersigned senators and civil society leaders, write this letter to urge Canada to take immediate action on the ongoing genocide against the Rohingya people in Myanmar by initiating proceedings before the International Court of Justice. There are almost now 1 million Rohingya refugees to have fled to Bangladesh. As of March of this year, Bangladesh advised the UN Security Council that it will no longer be accepting Rohingya refugees fleeing from Myanmar. For the Rohingya, it is clear that the situation is only worsening." On the line with us, we have Mr. Farid Khan, Rohingya Human Rights advocate. Mr. Khan, welcome to our show, and thank you so much for being with us.
Well, thank you for having me.
We're going to start going a few decades back to talk about the situation of the Rohingya, because obviously this is not a problem that developed overnight. So briefly, what were they going through?
Well, this issue began more than 4 decades ago. The Rohingya were a marginalized minority to begin with, but they used to have status, used to have rights, and they used citizenship within Myanmar. However, in the early 80s, 1982, I believe it was, the Myanmar government passed a law which stripped all Rohingya of their citizenship and the rights that go along with them, effectively making them stateless. And that's where the problem, the current problem began. And in subsequent years and decades, basically the narrative of labeling the Rohingya illegitimate residents of Myanmar, of dehumanizing them, of delegitimizing them, of basically creating circumstances that marginalized them even further than they were already marginalized, created a situation where basically you have a people who have no rights, who have none of the protections that anyone with citizenship has, and it to a narrative that calls for the elimination of the Rohingya.
What is
Myanmar
particular
society
about the Rohingya? I mean, ethnic differences, religious differences. What makes them a minority?
Well, first of all, they are Muslims in a predominantly Buddhist nation. 80% of the country is Buddhist. They are also visibly, physically different from the Buddhist majority. The vast majority of Buddhists in Myanmar look close to being like, Filipino or Chinese or Vietnamese. So that sort of, that group of peoples, whereas the Rohingya look more closely to Indians or Bangladeshis in terms of their physical facial features and their skin tone.
And when did you start your advocacy for the Rohingya people?
I actually been following the Rohingya issue for quite a number of years. I would see stories pop up every now and then about what was happening to them, and then finally in 2017, when the news broke about the atrocities that were being committed, I felt I needed to do more than what I had been doing. I began a petition calling on the Canadian government to act, and one of the main asks in that petition was to strip Aung San Suu Kyi, the Myanmar de facto leader, of her honorary Canadian citizenship. And that petition ended up in a very short time getting 50,000 supporters, which was presented to Parliament in the fall of 2017. However, despite the overwhelming support from Canadians for taking action on this issue, it wasn't until the following September that the federal government actually acted, and there were 2 resolutions unanimously passed in both the House of Commons and the Senate. One was to recognize the Rohingya, what was happening to the Rohingya, as genocide, which is a huge it's a huge thing to admit and accept the fact that genocide is taking place, because it then allows for other actions to follow.
Oh,
and
right.
then also to remove Aung San Suu Kyi as an honorary Canadian.
Yes, I mean, those are a lot of things, so let's take them one at a time. To get the government to recognize that this is a genocide, that there must be some criteria. So can you tell us how this motion was accepted in Canada, in the House of Commons?
Well, it was actually a very simple process. There are criteria of what constitutes genocide, and they are contained in the United Nations Convention on the prevention and prosecution of the crime of genocide. And there are 5 basic criteria. For genocide to be recognized, you only have to basically only one of those criteria have to be met. In the case of the Rohingya, all of the criteria have been met, basically. And but in terms of the process in the House of Commons and the Senate, basically in the House of Commons was a Bloc Québécois MP gave a notice of a motion that it was going to be presented. The motion was presented. Actually, it was passed with unanimous support, with very little discussion, and very quickly. And same thing happened in the case of the motion was presented, and it was accepted unanimously without really much debate.
Would you just mention to us the one of the criteria that was detrimental? I mean, what was a determining factor in recognizing that it was a genocide? I mean, we know that there are almost 1 million displaced Rohingya, right, who fled to Bangladesh. Was this one of the most important?
Yes, well, I mean, there are actually 1.3 million Rohingya sitting in refugee camps in Bangladesh and in the Indian Ocean countries and surrounding countries. There's another million, so there's more than 2 million Rohingya that have been forcibly pushed out of Myanmar. With respect to the genocide, whenever people think of genocide, they think of
killing,
they think
right?
of what happened in World War II with the Nazi concentration camps. That is the most extreme form of genocide.
Yes.
And that certainly is one of the things that have been met, because the Rohingya have been targeted and systematically, brutally murdered by the forces of the Myanmar military. So that's just one aspect of genocide. Another aspect of genocide is trying to prevent births. So there have been actually policies put in place to try and prevent Rohingya from increasing their population. There are about 140,000 Rohingya in Myanmar who are sitting in concentration camps, and another 250,000 who are living in very precarious and dangerous situations outside of those concentration camps. In those concentration camps, every aspect of their lives is controlled, even who they can marry. And it's all controlled by the forces of the Myanmar government. So it's a very dire situation. And last year, the United Nations marked the 70th anniversary of the UN Genocide Convention, and yet 70 years after that document was signed to prevent this sort of thing, it is still happening in Myanmar to the Rohingya.
Mr. Farikan, when you mention those figures, what is the source of them? I mean, how do you get your information? Because somebody could say this is not proven, it's happening in such a faraway place that we can't be sure that this is actually taking place. So what would you say to that?
Well, the sources are reputable sources from the United Nations, the United Nations Human Rights Commission, the United Nations Office of the Commissioner of Refugees, also from reputable international NGOs that are working in the region. So organizations like UNICEF, like Save the Children, like Oxfam, and other international NGOs that actually have been in the region. Now, with respect to what's happening specifically in Myanmar, the figures are obviously hard to verify, because the Myanmar government is not letting outside investigators or outside interests into the country, specifically into Rakhine where the atrocities occurred and where a lot of these people are being held. So the numbers about the Rohingya remaining in Myanmar, those are estimates. The number that is generally agreed to is there's somewhere between 350,000 to 400,000 Rohingya remaining in Myanmar, and of those, about 140,000 are in concentration camps. And these are numbers that can be easily verified by doing research.
Mr. Farid Khan, we know that Canada had a delegation headed by Mr. Bob Rae, and after that he did a report. So can you tell us what this report said in a sense?
Well, basically, the Rae report pretty much affirmed what was happening. I mean, the title of the report was "Tell Them We're Human." And essentially that's about is that these are people who the Myanmar government does not consider to be human. They consider them to be cockroaches and vermin to be exterminated. Mr. Rae did end up having, I believe, one or two meetings with Aung San Suu Kyi, and just from briefings he gave back in Canada, he told us that the briefings were tense because the Myanmar government did not accept the allegations that were being made, did not accept the facts that were being presented. Aung San Suu Kyi went so far as to make the statement that the claims of mass rape were fake news, and yet there's documented evidence of gang rapes of Rohingya women by Myanmar soldiers. Two Reuters journalists were jailed for revealing some of the evidence to confirm atrocities were being committed. In the report, there were a number of recommendations made. He didn't make any. He only made 17 recommendations, which is not huge with respect to reports of this nature. And those recommendations covered the humanitarian crisis, the political situation, the questions of accountability and impunity about the atrocities being committed, and effective coordination and cooperation between international players to address the issue. The one thing that his report did not specifically mention was the matter of genocide. He did not call it a genocide. He has since publicly made statements to state that, but in the report itself, that was not the case.
All right. So, but there has been a subsequent motion now called the Motion 476 submitted to the House of Commons. And this motion has been signed by senators, by yourself, Mr. Farid Khan, as a Rohingya Human Rights advocate and head of the Rohingya Human Rights Network. Can you tell us about the essence of this motion?
Yeah, actually, the motion was in the House of Commons. It was actually in the Senate. And the motion was presented back in April by Senator Mary Lou McPhedran, who is an independent senator from Manitoba. And the motion called on the Canadian government. It was a motion directed to the Canadian government to take action at the International Court of Justice under the Genocide Convention and to begin legal proceedings against Myanmar committing genocide. Now, unfortunately, the motion, because of delays by conservative senators in the business of the Senate, the motion never came to a vote before the
summer recess.
The Senate rose for the summer, and the Senate won't be coming back until after the federal election. And the thing is, this motion was co-sponsored by people from every caucus within the Senate. So there was a conservative senator who had signed on to this motion, but even despite that, the conservative senators did not allow this motion to be voted on, which I think is very regrettable. After that happened, the senator issued an open letter to the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Christopher Freeland, and as you mentioned, it was signed by a third of the Senate and civil society organizations and individuals who are supporting the efforts to help the Rohingya. Over 100 signatures on that letter, and it's basically calling on the Canadian government to do what the motion was calling for, which is to file a legal case against Myanmar at the International Court of Justice in The Hague under the UN Genocide Convention.
What is the obligation of Canada? I mean, is this something that is desirable, or is Canada bound by some treaties that they would have to act in a case of genocide?
Well, yes. I mean, the thing is that Canada is bound by a treaty, and that treaty is the UN Genocide Convention, which Canada signed and ratified in the late 1940s, early 1950s. Myanmar is also a state party to that. Now, the fact that Canada has recognized that a crime of genocide has taken place means that they're obligated to then move to the next step. And that is what they have not done, which is in contravention of their legal responsibilities, moral responsibilities under the Genocide Convention, which is why we've been pushing so hard since last fall when the Parliament recognized the genocide. We've been pushing so hard on the Canadian government to basically take the next step. Imagine, if you will, in any city in the country, a mayor or a city council says there's a crime taking place, there's a crime wave taking place, mass murder, and we know who the mass murderer is, and we have evidence to prove that this person is committing mass murder. But then that's where it stops. There's effectively no effort to get the police to arrest this person. Essentially, that's what we have. The Canadian government has recognized that the crime of genocide has taken place. It has recognized the fact that there is evidence out there to prove the crime of genocide, but it has not taken the next step, and we, for the life of us, cannot understand why the Canadian government is not fulfilling its legal and moral obligation under the UN Genocide Convention. So this is very disappointing.
Without going to the Hague, the report that Mr. Bob Ray submitted, what were one of the main recommendations? We don't have much time for the 17 of them, but if you'd like to mention one or two, I believe.
Sure. One of the key recommendations was that Canada commit $450 million. Sorry, I'm going to sort of. I can't remember the exact figure, but I think it was $450 or $600 million over 4 years for humanitarian aid. However, the federal government committed $300 million over 3 years, so substantially less than what he recommended. It also recommended a multi-year plan for development assistance to help the Rohingya and to work within the United Nations. One of the recommendations also called for political engagement to address the foundation of what is going on, and which is a genocide agenda by the Myanmar government,
yes,
and to work with national partners to gather evidence to take to the International Criminal Court so that individuals can be held accountable. However, we are calling on the Canadian government not only hold individuals accountable, but also to hold the state of Myanmar accountable, because by going to the International Court of Justice and holding the state accountable, it allows for restitution and reparations for the Rohingya who have been affected by the atrocities that have been committed.
One last question, Mr. Farid Khan. We have read in the news that some have returned actually to Myanmar from Bangladesh. How is this resettlement taking place?
Well, some have returned, but there's very small in number. I think it's less than 200 people. And the Rohingya who have returned are actually Hindu Rohingyas, because there are a minority of Rohingya who are Hindu, and a lot of ones who have returned happen to be Hindu. And they have done so because, I don't understand the reason why, because it didn't matter if you were Hindu or Muslim Rohingya, both were targeted, but there are some who have returned, and obviously there are efforts to try and have some sort of mechanism to have the larger numbers return. But the thing is, this cannot happen until there's a guarantee of safety for all of the Rohingya, as well as what the Rohingya are calling for is citizenship, a return of their citizenship, which was stripped from them. So the numbers that have returned are very small, less than a couple of hundred in a sea of 1.3 million. It's really not a huge number that have returned.
Not at all. Thank you very much, Mr. Farid Khan. This is all what our time allows us for this interview, and hopefully we will be following the situation with you in the near future. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much for having me and covering this very important humanitarian issue.